Malik Ankira here. Today I want to talk about the kettlebell swing, an exercise that's often overlooked by powerlifters and has really only been embraced as of late by the CrossFit community and those lame exercise classes designed for out-of-shape middle-aged women. This is unfortunate because they've taken an exercise that can be great for developing strength, power, and resilience in the posterior chain and turned it into another endurance contest. And consequently, that's how it's viewed by the average fitness enthusiast. But today, I plan to change all that. Let's start by going over exactly what a proper kettlebell swing is. For starters, you're going to have to take a somewhat wide stance, definitely a bit wider than shoulder width, because the kettlebell is going to have to swing in between your legs and it needs somewhere to go unless you don't mind bashing yourself in the nuts. It almost goes without saying, but the spine should obviously remain neutral throughout the duration of the set. The majority of the movement should take place by hinging the hips backwards and allowing the torso to incline forwards. A common mistake people make is to get the quads overly involved by bending the knees too much, but really the focal point should be the hips. And as they extend backwards, you should feel a tremendous stretch in your hamstrings. At this point, just as your hamstrings have reached the limits of their flexibility, you have to absorb an incredibly large eccentric force in order to halt and reverse the momentum of the swinging kettlebell. Using that stretch reflex, the hamstrings must then work to pull the bell forward through the legs until the hips are almost locked out, at which point the movement is finished by punching the hips to full extension with a powerful glute contraction. At its peak, the kettlebell will reach somewhere around waist or at most chest height. The arms should be treated merely as strings that connect the hips to the kettlebell. They're not involved in pulling it through the legs or artificially pulling it higher than the hip contraction moved it. You don't get extra points for pulling the kettlebell up over your head using your shoulders. The sole purpose of the exercise is to create as forceful of a hip contraction as possible on every single repetition. The height the bell moves to is almost inconsequential and should not be used as any sort of gauge. Rather, it should simply be a side effect of proper execution. Now that we've covered some of the technical points of the exercise, let's discuss a few of its benefits for strength athletes. There are three main points I want to touch on. One, it's great for developing hip strength and power. Two, it can be done very frequently. And three, it can protect against injuries. So point number one, kettlebell swings are great for developing hip strength and power. In my opinion, this is the primary benefit of the exercise, but one that's often lost with the way people generally do swings. Like I said earlier, you only really see swings being done as a part of CrossFit, where they use super light kettlebells and try to do 1,000,000 reps at a time. I believe they also swing the kettlebell all the way overhead, which again is stupid because once it reaches chest height, the hips have already done their part and you're basically just using your front delts to raise it the rest of the way. Not to mention, this style of swinging is going to severely limit the amount of weight you can use, putting a huge cap on how much force you can produce at the hips, therefore limiting the benefits you'll get from the exercise. However, if we ignore the CrossFitters and start to actually treat the swing like we would other weight room exercises, i.e. by using a challenging weight and performing multiple sets of 10 to 20 reps, and from there progressively increasing the loading, we see that the swing is actually a great strength and power builder. The exercise itself is inherently speed oriented, and due to its plyometric nature, really lends itself to kind of getting into a rhythm within the set. And this is where the true magic happens. As you gracefully and almost effortlessly transition between eccentric and concentric, you can feel your hamstrings firing like crazy to stop you from getting yanked backwards, and your glutes end up on fire after every hip punch at the top of each swing. By using heavy loads and sticking to standard rep ranges, these muscles are actually able to produce very significant and meaningful amounts of force and become fatigued before your lungs do, changing the exercise from endurance-oriented to strength-oriented. Everyone can use more strength and power in their posterior chain, and this exercise has almost no learning curve and can pretty much be done anywhere, making it a great choice for fitness enthusiasts as well as athletes. The movement pattern is also very similar to a deadlift and heavily taxes the prime movers involved in the deadlift, making it a great assistance exercise for powerlifters. And this leads me to point number two. It can be done very frequently without overtaxing the body, much unlike the deadlift, which is far too taxing to perform with any great frequency. You could potentially do swings anywhere from once a week to every single day if you worked up to it properly. Even doing several hundred heavy repetitions in a single session doesn't ever crush the body. Sure, the muscles get sore at first, but they adapt very quickly. So this exercise gives you the opportunity to accrue a great volume of work for your posterior chain, which will lead to greater hypertrophy and strength, and ultimately a bigger deadlift. And unlike other remedial posterior chain exercises that can be done more frequently than the deadlift, like hyperextensions, glute ham raises, leg curls, etc., this one is not only much more potent overall, but also involves a large power component, a capacity which is a boon to deadlifting prowess. Moving on to point number 3, kettlebell swings can protect against injuries. It's well documented that having strong hamstrings can protect against knee injuries, and having strong glutes can help spare the lower back. The swing heavily activates and strengthens the entire posterior chain, so it can be a helpful weapon in keeping these problem areas pain-free. Not to mention, it can be very helpful in creating balanced leg development in athletes and powerlifters, two populations who often do a lot of squatting and are at risk for becoming overly quad dominant. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, the swing can directly protect against hamstring strains by conditioning your hamstring muscles and their tendinous counterparts to absorb incredibly large eccentric forces and utilize the stretch reflex to efficiently expel them. And while there is an injury risk present from handling large eccentric loads, the key here is that there's minimal risk of injury from the swing because we're able to begin training it with a load we can easily handle, and from there progressively increasing the weight of the implement as our hamstrings become stronger and more resilient. If one were to jump right in with a kettlebell that was beyond their capabilities, they would risk at best getting their ass thrown onto the floor, and at worst tearing a hamstring. So now the question becomes, how do we progressively load this exercise without buying 100 overpriced kettlebells of different weights? I'm glad you asked, because all it requires to make your own easily adjustable handle for kettlebell swings is a few cheap pieces of plumbing pipe from Home Depot or any other hardware store. 2 3/4 inch by 6 inch black steel nipples make up the handles of our kettlebell. 1 3/4 inch by 12 inch black steel nipple makes up the body. 1 3/4 inch black iron threaded T is used to secure the 3 pieces together, and 1 3/4 inch cap is used as a collar to keep the weights from falling off. The total cost is less than $15, and now you have a kettlebell that you can micro adjust in the smallest increments you want. All you need is some good old-fashioned 1-inch plates to load it with. Contrast this with actual kettlebells. A 97-pound kettlebell goes for $112 from Rogue Fitness. The 150-pounder goes for $168, and the 203-pounder goes for $223. So even if you wanted to just buy these 3 kettlebells and make huge 50-pound jumps in weight, this would still run you $500, and that's insane. If I had to go that route, I think I would just skip kettlebell swings altogether. But I don't have to, because I have my sweet $15 adjustable kettlebell. And that's why they call me MacGyver. Just kidding, they don't. But they should. Anyway, I'll link all this stuff in the description so you guys can take a look at it. And I just want to make one final point. If you do decide to embrace the swinging lifestyle, it's very important that you put 100% effort into every repetition. When fatigue starts to set in, it can be very easy to trick yourself and tell yourself that you're going all out with every punch, when really you're just going through the motions. To the outside observer, there won't really be any difference, but deep down inside, you'll know. And in reality, if you fall victim to this, you'll only be cheating yourself because your strength won't improve. You'll just be a guy who flails around like a crazy person with a heavy weight in his hands. Anyway, that's all I got for now, guys. If you like the content I produce, please be sure to like the video and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Other than that, get swinging, and I'll catch you guys next time.